Hello, everybody. I should be coming to you nice and loudly. I am Benny Lewis, and I am going to be talking about intensive language learning projects and how and why you should consider them if they're for your kind of personality and lifestyle. So let's go right on into it. So if you don't know of me, I have been traveling for 20 years. So since 2003, I have been nomadic. And in 2009, I started the blog Fluent in 3 months. And it quickly became essentially the highest trafficked language blog in the world. I've also written books and I've done lots of other things. But today I really want to hone in on the title because I got a lot of skepticism as I started in the language learning community. And I understand where that comes from. And I really want to show you why my language learning philosophy is so centered around this timeline and goal. So, yeah, essentially, my book has this title, Fluent in 3 months. It's an international bestseller, and it's been translated into a bunch of languages. And the blog has that title, and the book came out, I believe, in 2013 or 14. And the blog, I started that in 2009. But like I said, I've been traveling since 2003, and this has been my learning philosophy. And it's so central to how I have success in languages, and it's really why I want to demonstrate that with the philosophy behind it. So let's go back a bit. I'm going to take my headphones off. I don't actually need them. Let's go back a bit for what happened before the blog. Essentially, as I said, I am a traveler. This is a look at all the places that I have been in the world. I've been to many places in many different continents. A bit more specifically, oops. Yeah, so this is where I've been in Asia. You can see the green line coming out of the red dot. I'm currently in Indonesia as I record this. My next destination will be South Korea. I have extensively traveled in Latin America. I've spent a good 4 years or so there. And you can see I've gone up the coast of Brazil, spent a while in the US, but I've also gone through Mexico as well. As it happens, one theme of my travels is I try to travel a little deeper. So you'll notice in Mexico, I've effectively visited every state south and east of Mexico City. And in the US, I visited 44 of the states. In Europe, I've been all over the place. For many of these countries, I've been there for over a year. I've truly wanted to get immersed, get to know locals, make friends, and do all sorts of that kind of stuff, and like experience the culture through the language. So this kind of brings us to. Sorry, my presentation has a little space delay on it there. This brings us to the biggest issue that I was finding in all those first years that I was traveling is I would eventually get into successfully learning the language myself. And the biggest problem that I was seeing as a nomad, as a traveler, was that expats were moving to countries, living there for long periods of time, and not successfully learning the language. So this really came out to me as a problem that I know I could try to solve. I was somebody who only spoke English when I started traveling. I got caught into this expat bubble as well. And I didn't learn, my first attempt at learning a language was Spanish in Spain. I did not learn that. And eventually I succeeded. So if I can do this, maybe I can give advice to other people. And I started to give that advice in person, where I'd meet people in my travels and I'd say, you have to try things like speak from day one. You have to make mistakes and all these things that are just a central part of my learning philosophy, and a couple of others that I'll get to in a minute. But this is the problem that I wanted to solve. And it's why when I started in the language learning community, I was definitely coming at it from a very different angle to a lot of other language learning creators that you would come across, who are passionate about languages in and of themselves, who maybe have other motivations and other goals to learn the language. But for me, I needed to travel to the country and immerse myself. And I saw lots of people who were not successfully doing that. And I really wanted to help those people. I wanted to help the expats that I kept seeing to successfully learn their language. And that's what started my passion of the blog. It wasn't necessarily helping people who have a passion to learn a language for other reasons, that maybe they appreciate content in the language. Maybe someday in a few years they might want to travel to the country, or there's a million other reasons you are learning a language. But when you think about expats in the country, there's a certain sense of urgency that they really need to learn that language quickly because it's impacting their day-to-day lives. And that was impacting my day-to-day life in all of these years of intensive travels. So that's the problem that I was trying to solve. So with that in mind, one of the ways that I would talk about my language learning method was really relying on the SMART philosophy of achieving your goals. So this is the acronym SMART, that it is a goal you have in your life that is specific, measurable, achievable. I know this picture says agreed. I don't know why, but it's achievable, realistic, and time bounded. And one of the biggest issues that I came across as I was talking to all of these aspiring language learners who were not doing anything in the country is that they didn't have any of this. They had a general idea that someday they'd like to speak the language at a higher level, but it wasn't specific, it wasn't measurable, there was no timeline whatsoever associated with it. All of these things were missing. And that really, there we go, achievable. That really spoke to me that this is something I need to tackle. And this is what inspired the name of the blog. I was thinking to myself, I need to really instigate into people that they need to have smart goals. They need to have a very specific goal in a specific timeline. So I'm going to share one of those examples with them. And this is essentially where I started the blog. This is a snapshot of it after it had only been live for a few months. And I would share my language learning projects over a very short span of just 3 months as I would be traveling and trying to learn the language. And by being specific and by having end goals that were measurable and all of these other things that are part of an efficient way of achieving what you want, that's what I was trying to demonstrate as I started the blog. I didn't actually expect the blog to grow like it did. I didn't expect it to turn into a book or a business or anything. I just knew when I started that this philosophy is what I really wanted to share. So, of course, that begs the question, what do you mean by all of these different things? So specifically for me, fluency means the B2 level on the European Common Framework Scale. So for me, this effectively means I am socially equivalent to how I would be in my mother tongue in these kinds of environments. Like if I went to a friend's barbecue in their back garden, or if I went to the pub, or any other kind of social situation, that I could have effectively the same conversations that I would be able to have in my mother tongue of English. That for me is the beginnings of fluency. Now, I have reached beyond that. I have a C2 diploma in Spanish, and I've studied various C exams in other languages. But ultimately, the mastery level of a language, while very useful for certain things like your professional life, it can be very, very useful. So I could work as an engineer, because engineering is my initial background. I could work as an engineer in my C-level languages, but realistically, with the goals of what I need to do for most of my language skills, I need to function socially. I need to be able to make friends in the countries that I'm going to. And I want to have deeper interactions to truly get to know the local culture. And I really believe that that B2 level is where you are skyrocketed into being able to do so many of those things. So that's very specifically what I mean. And that's when I say it's measurable. I mean, it's measurable in the sense that I would potentially be able to pass most, if not all, of a B2 exam if they existed for that language. So that's where my idea of fluency is attached to. I know it's not necessarily going to be the same for a lot of people. Some people may have extremely high standards for what fluency means to them. I don't think that's very realistic. I think I would use the word mastery for the C levels, especially because while it's very nice to have and it's a great thing to work towards, realistically in your social life, if you're not going to be working as a professional in the language, you don't necessarily urgently need to get to the C levels. You do urgently need to get to B2, but you don't urgently need to get beyond that. So this is why the centerpiece of my learning philosophy has always been about let's get to B2 and let's see how that might look and how I would make that happen. So the next question is, of course, why 3 months? Why not take your time and spend a few years learning the language? And there's several reasons for this that I want to explain, because I feel like this has definitely caused lots of controversy when this comes up in certain forum posts or whatever, that they don't understand why you would need 3 months. Very simply, one of the reasons the 3 months timeline existed for me initially was because for a lot of countries that you would go to as a European, you tend to get a 3-month tourist visa. So for the first maybe 10 or so years of my travels, the theme of arriving in the country to learn the language was something that I did. So that was kind of tied to a 3-month deadline. But ultimately, I decided that that was not something that I wanted to continue. And I haven't actually learned the language that way for a long time. But that was one of the inspirations, is that it would be, if I'm traveling, it would be the only amount of time that I would actually have in the country. But there are other reasons. And one of the biggest reasons is it fits in something that I like to think of as like a Goldilocks zone. So you all know the Goldilocks fable of like the 3 bears and all of that. Well, they've actually taken that analogy and they've applied it in other fields. So for instance, in this image, you can see how they imagine the Goldilocks zone in physics, and they imagine an area of the solar system that you could actually have a planet that would be able to sustain life, depending on the distance from the star and the size of the star. So this is in physics. So I think more of the Goldilocks zone in my context is important for time. And when I imagine, and you can picture that, having run the blog like I do for many years, I get my biggest spike of traffic. Like if I look at my analytics over the year, I get a huge spike of traffic on New Year's Day, because everyone's flooding in and they have their New Year's resolution to learn language and they're Googling things, and that's how they end up on my blog. And typically a New Year's resolution has a year-long implied deadline. It doesn't really necessarily have a very specific goal with that year, but it at least kind of feels like it might be a year. But for a lot of people, they tend to say, I want to learn Spanish. And there is absolutely no specificity there. So it's kind of implied you would need years and years and years. And I definitely understand where for many people, it's not only necessary, but it's the only option for them to put a little bit of time in every week and then spend a few years to reach their goal in the language. And that's fine. But if there's a certain sense of urgency, and it is literally the most important thing in your life, such as if you're moving to a new country and you want to be able to function and have friendships and a basic social life and so on, then it becomes a bit more urgent, and that means you can do it intensively. So if you're doing it intensively, then you come into a kind of a new problem that, like, if you have whatever amount of time you might decide you want to have, like if you have a whole year, then could you realistically give it 100% of your dedication for a whole year? Personally, I don't think so. I'm currently learning currently learning a new language, and it is extremely exhausting for me. I'm putting 60, that's 60 hours a week into this language project. I am making a lot of sacrifices in the short term ahead of travels to a country. And this level of sacrifice for this level of intensity is not something I can maintain for a very long time. This is not a lifestyle. This is a burst of activity. So that means I have to decide when is my cutoff point. And 3 months fits this Goldilocks zone because it's just enough time that you can make a significant change in your language level and you can make significant progress. But it's not too long to drain your energy that you would feel completely burnt out and stress yourself out and run into a lot of other personal problems in your life that you could potentially, if you're lucky enough, like in my case, I can work more 9 months out of the year so that I can create a bit more free time. And I'm also flexible in where I live, so I can move to a very cheap place. And that is exactly why I'm coming to you live from Indonesia. Even though I'm not learning Indonesian specifically right now, I'm actually learning Korean. But I picked a cheap place because I knew I could do work ahead of time. And then because of my current lifestyle, I can kind of block 3 months, which again, I realize is not something that's realistic for everybody. But at the same time, there's also a lot of people who might be able to, especially younger people, who could potentially make this kind of sacrifice in their lives. If you're putting 4 years of your life into a university degree and you're potentially about to start your career, you may consider, well, if I can put 4 years aside for something that's going to make such a big impact in my life, maybe I can put 3 months aside and make learning the language the absolute focus in that time. So this is something that like really is so impactful, that you get that right balance of it's just enough time that you can really make a big difference. Because in a few weeks or a month, you could do it intensively, but the amount of progress you're going to make isn't as significant as it could be in 3 entire months. But then again, you can at least wind yourself down and not completely drain your life force as you would if you were doing it for your entire life. So that's kind of the Goldilocks zone concept. Another reason that for me 3 months is absolutely necessary, and learning intensively is absolutely necessary, is that I have ADHD. So this has always been a problem in my life, that I have serious issues focusing. And I've had to change my learning approach in many ways. I had to do a lot of workarounds to be able to pass my exams in school and in university, and then to be able to work for myself. I've had to figure out all sorts of systems that force me to be able to focus, because otherwise I'd get absolutely nothing done, because I have a very difficult problem to get into consistent focus over a very long amount of time. And this is why this is one of the biggest reasons, apart from what I've talked about, that it just fits with my lifestyle and travels so well. Another reason I wouldn't really get into the longer term, gradual, just a little bit of learning every week approach, is because that just doesn't work for me. With the way my brain works, the only way I've achieved anything in my life, whether that be related to my business or my personal life or my goals like language learning, is I get this spark of interest and I have to run with it, and I have to make that my absolute priority, and it can get all of my attention. And this is one of the downsides of ADHD, is that somebody with this kind of brain can only really focus on, like, have one big, huge project in their life. They can do very well with that project, but they're very bad at multitasking. And I'm like that. I can't really have multiple things I'm doing in my life at the same time. And I'm very impressed when I talk to other people and I can see that they can multitask. So there are lots of language learners I've talked to who would never really do the intensive level of learning that I'm doing. And when I talk to them, I realize they do not have an ADHD kind of personality. Their brain is a lot more organized. They're the kind of person who really is a fan of perfectionism. They need everything in their life to work well, and they are very good at planning their day, and they can make long-term plans where they'll have a little bit of studying sprinkled throughout their week, and then they would maintain that for several years, and then they get the results from that. This unfortunately just can't work for me. I have been trying to have many different projects in my life, and I can tell you from experience that doing the little sprinkles through my day unfortunately doesn't work with my personality and my brain type. So with ADHD, that's the big disadvantage. But there's a couple of things that I have to keep in mind as I move forward with that. So for instance, like I said, I'm currently learning Korean, and I have blocked 3 months out of my life that I'm not doing anything else at all. I'm not even having a social life here in Indonesia. There's lots of parties and stuff going on. I'm not going to any of that. I'm not doing work on the blog beyond the bare minimum of recording videos for my YouTube channel and so on about this project. And what that means is I end up with a good 60 hours a week that I'm able to be sitting down and in Korean learning mode. But I have to pay the ADHD tax, which effectively means I know I'm not going to get 60 hours of true effective work because I get distracted very, very easily by, I'm using Anki on my phone. My phone has all these apps on it that'll distract me. I'm trying to move to different places to kind of stimulate my brain. So rather than just doing it here, I'll do it in cafes and co-working spaces. And I get distracted by people walking in and out. So I get distracted very, very easily. And that means that out of the 60 hours a week I put into language learning, I only get about 40 hours of truly dedicated, usable work from that time. So this is another reason that I need that momentum. I need to be able to spend the whole day just to get 2/3 out of the hours. And it's why if I was just doing a little bit each day, that little bit would probably end up turning out to be the pink part of this chart and just me time wasting and not really getting anything done. So this is something that I have to deal with an ADHD brain. And it's just been an issue I've had my whole life, that in school I got in trouble from teasing the teacher and getting distracted. And it's why traditional learning approaches that are way more grammar heavy and sitting in a class with other people are never going to work for me. I cannot take a group lesson for language learning. I have to be engaged with a teacher one-on-one, or I have to be using something that is keeping my attention. And I've just had to learn this about myself, and it's why it's been incorporated so much into my language learning method. So what this means is I see other people's approaches. Like when you look on Instagram and you see people share their language learning routine, and I see these beautiful notebooks with multiple colors and very pretty notes and their plan for the day of what they're going to do now and then. I cannot do that. This level of organization does not work in my brain. I live an extremely chaotic life, so I have to direct my chaos in a way that works for me. And it's another reason why I feel like if you might think you have a similar kind of way of thinking, or you would lean towards ADHD, then maybe this approach might work for you. But again, if you're a much more organized person, the amount of intensity that I'm talking about it would burn other people out much quicker. So ADHD at least has the one advantage that I am very good at being focused on one task if it's for a very limited amount of time, and I push myself that amount of time is 3 months. I can't do much more than 3 months because then I lose interest in whatever the task is. And it's why like my Korean experience is going to be 3 months of just learning the language. And then I completely change my whole lifestyle and I'm in travel mode again. And then I'm experiencing Korea, actually speaking Korean, making friends and getting K-pop dance lessons or all the other fun stuff that I'm going to be doing in Korea. That's going to be a completely different kind of lifestyle. But this focus is an advantage of ADHD, that I can drive that and I can put this level of passion into one project very intensively over a very short burst. And that is a big reason why I have the 3 months in the Fluent 3 months project. Another aspect of why I started the blog, and whenever I'm coaching people, a big aspect that I try to encourage with them is having accountability. So by sharing on the blog what my projects are and sharing the end goal and having that title be around that end goal, I have that extra pressure to perform and to have some kind of result by the end. Because I find if I just told myself, you know, Benny, you're going to learn this language over 3 months, then it's very easy for me, even with my drive and focus, it's very easy for me to just decide after a month and be like, yeah, do you know what? I don't really care about this anymore, or I'm getting too distracted by other things. So I just won't put this level of effort into the project anymore. But by announcing it to the world and publicly saying on YouTube, I'm going to learn this language, I'm going to try and get to this level in 3 months. I can't guarantee I'll get to it, but by at least telling everybody I'm really going to try my best, it pushes me to get as close as I possibly can get to it. Sometimes I'll reach it. Sometimes I might fall a little short and get to that B1 level, but I never would have made it as far as I did if I didn't have that accountability. Because on the days when I'm feeling lazy and thinking, you know what, maybe I'll just binge a Netflix show in English today, then I remember I have to record a YouTube video to show my progress in a week. So I can't take a day to watch a Netflix show. I need to be focusing on my project. And that accountability really helps to direct my effort and focus with this kind of project. But ultimately, what this is all about for me is cultural exploration. Like I said at the start, I am a travel writer. Travel is my passion. I got a National Geographic Award for my work as a travel writer. And I want to meet so many people around the world and experience the culture through their eyes, while absolutely not limiting myself to just those who speak English. And this is what truly drives me. And that's why I can't really ever learn a language in isolation. And I think it's another thing that, like, maybe some people, especially in this community, you'll find as you talk to people, a lot of people are truly passionate about language learning. I can't say that about myself. I'm not passionate about language learning. I'm passionate about getting to know people of other cultures, and the language is my tool that opens that door. And that's what helps me to get through it and to push through some boring exercises in the book I have to do, or to go ahead with my language lesson online when I really don't feel like it today. Is I'm remembering, no, in a few months, you're going to be traveling in the country and you need to be able to communicate yourself. You need to be able to make friends. And this is what has been a central aspect of my life for the last 2 decades, is learning the language to experience the culture. So that is another reason why the project exists. So with my current project, for instance, that's a webtoon version of me. So effectively, as I showed you earlier, my book's been translated into Korean. And what I want to do is I want to do a book tour when I'm in South Korea. I'm going to be there for at least 2 months, probably 3. And I want to be able to meet people who want to learn languages themselves. And they would be Koreans. Maybe the language they're learning is English. Maybe it's another language. And I want to help inspire them so that they could potentially explore the world and meet people and so on. And I've done this in other countries. Last year, I had a wonderful book tour in Brazil, where I was promoting my books there. And the fact that I speak Portuguese at that level that I do meant that I was able to explain myself. I was able to talk to people, and I was able to inspire people. And I really like that through my blog, the main reason that it exists, and that like nearly everything on the blog is completely free. 99.9% of all the work that I do and that my team does is for articles that can inspire people without them ever paying us a penny, is because I can use this wonderful tool that I have access to spread this encouraging message that anyone can try to learn a language. They just need to figure out the right method for them. So I can use all of those resources, but ultimately I'm going to be going to Korea, and I'm going to try and live my life through Korean while I'm there, the same way I've done that in other language projects. So that's why for these 3 months, all I'm thinking about and all I'm doing is Korean all day long. Like this talk I'm giving to you guys is the longest I've spoken in English for weeks, I think, because most of my speaking is with my language teachers online. So just to think about like who should and shouldn't consider this level of intensity. So like obviously, as I was saying before, I am lucky in that I can engineer my life in such a way that I can live in a very cheap country while I still have a salary from a richer country, so that I can also organize my workload so that I can take 3 months, not necessarily as a holiday. I'm definitely not relaxing. I'm quite stressed out, if I'm being honest, because of the level of work and intensity I'm doing. But I can do that. But I've also helped a lot of people, and I've coached a lot of people through Fluent in 3 months who have their own intensive projects where they're also working full-time jobs and they have families to support, and they're not traveling and they can't be in a cheap country right now. So it has still worked for other people at that level of intensity. And it's mainly because they have a true end goal in mind. They really know in their life there's a very big, passionate reason that they need to very intensively improve their language skills. If they don't have that reason, and if their passion for the language is not necessarily as specifically targeted, then maybe an intensive project is not necessarily going to be as useful for them, because it can be very stressful. You have to make a lot of sacrifices. Another thing is, like I said, I have ADHD, so it really fits with my brain and my personality to do it very intensively. And I find when I've talked to people who are very non-ADHD, they're very organized, and they really enjoy taking their time with things, then that kind of personality level is not really going to fit very well with an intensive learning project. Because even though it's stressful for me at the moment, this level of intensity and the fact that I've made a lot of sacrifices, it's still the level of intensity and chaos that works in my life, because I'm used to this in many, many aspects of how I live my life. Is I've geared it to be able to support this kind of project. So in that sense, it wouldn't necessarily work for some people. It wouldn't work if you have goals that aren't necessarily about speaking the language. So, if you're more passionate about reading the language, it's not really something you would do in a short amount of time. You might want to enjoy books and so on. This is definitely something that might take a few years. If the C levels are something you truly want to get on top of, that is something that you can't really push yourself. Like the level of intensity really maxes out at the B2 level. There's only so much you can fit in your brain in a short amount of time. You just need a break after that, or you'll have a mental breakdown. So there's lots of reasons why you may or may not want to have this level of an intensive approach. But yeah, I just thought I would mention that real quick. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to make sure I have time the last 10 minutes to answer your questions. And very quickly, if you are curious for more, and if you didn't get to see me live this time, I do live streams on Instagram at Language Hacking. You can hear my Language Hacking podcast where I talk solo and then I interview other people. You can see how I'm doing my current Korean project, by going to youtube.com/@fi3m. And of course, if you want my guidance in a much more personal way, I have my bootcamp at fi3m.com/bootcamp, where I coach people who want to learn a language intensively, and I incorporate a lot of the things that I talked about today. So check that out if you're curious. But other than that, I am good to take your questions. Okay, so Timothy, with the most voted up so far, after learning intensively for 3 months and then moving on to another project, how easy is it to retain what you've learned intensively? Excellent question. And I decided to not add it as a separate bullet point, but it is a point that another disadvantage of learning the language intensively is you are more likely to forget it intensively. So even though there are 6 or 7 languages that I speak at the B2 or higher level, so that's what makes me a polyglot, is I have those 6 or 7 languages. There are actually about 15 or 16 languages that I have learned intensively over 3 months that I do not speak because I have not maintained them at all. So it's the kind of thing that you will forget it very quickly. But then again, this isn't necessarily just limited to intensive projects. This is true regardless of what your language learning approach may be, is that you will forget your language if you're not maintaining it. So you can't learn a language in 3 months and then remember it for the rest of your life without any extra effort. You have to put the work in to maintaining it. And maintaining it is something that I do in a much slower way. I don't need the same level and drive and motivation as I do in the stages up to B2, because beyond B2, I enjoy the language so much that it is just a part of my life, and I can enjoy content and I can have friends in the language. So it becomes so much easier to then maintain it. And also, if you do reach something like the B2 point, it's got a certain half-life to it that you can take a little break and come back to it, and you haven't forgotten too much of it. But if over 3 months you only reach an A2 or B1 level, you will forget that very quickly. So it's definitely incorporated into this whole challenge that you have to then long-term figure out, how is this language going to look like in your life? So very good question there, Timothy. Next question from Manuel. How does your current daily language schedule look like? What activities do you do during the day? So with Korean, I really decide what my biggest issues are based on the spoken lessons I'm getting with my teacher. And for the first half of this project, the biggest issue was by far vocabulary. So I have my favorite app on my phone is Anki, and I am doing flashcards for about 4 hours a day, where I'm trying to get as many of the, not just vocabulary, but now in the last few weeks, I've added the grammar into my flashcards. So I'll see the grammar in my textbook. I do about 1 hour a day of textbook studies. And some of the textbook will have grammar sentences like the word order is different or whatever that may be. And I make sure that's incorporated into Anki so that I can study it. And so Anki is a huge part of my day. So for 4 hours of Anki, 1 to 2 hours of spoken practice with a native speaker. So I'll find these on italki or Preply or whatever, and I will very consistently speak the language, and I spoke my Korean from day one. If you think that's crazy, that's not possible, go to the YouTube. See, I've got the link there, the YouTube channel. Go to my YouTube channel and you will see how I spoke Korean on day one of learning it, to begin to have that momentum. That it is possible. You have to use some workarounds, but you get that momentum and then you can keep it up a little bit easier. So speaking is crucial. And now in the second half of the project, I'm incorporating a lot more native content. So I'll be watching a lot more videos. I have separate Instagram and TikTok accounts that I've created in Korean, and I'm training the algorithm and following the right people. So I only see content in that language, and that's going to be one way I get the exposure. I might watch some shows and all of that, but at the same time, I don't want to imply that you could get to fluency by just watching Netflix. It has to be the icing on the cake of what you're doing to truly make progress each day. So I'm going to be using that to wind down my day after an intensive day of both studying and speaking the language. So I hope that answers that question. Lenka is asking, do you revisit languages you've learned earlier once you leave the country? Absolutely. So if you look back on my map of the world here, whoops, Daisy. Yeah, there's my world. You can see I go back to the countries very, very frequently. So you can see I didn't just have one line to Brazil and then I left again. I've spent about a year and a half of my life in Brazil, each time through different visits. I've been to Spain maybe about 10 different times. So that's amounted to about 2 years. And what else? I've been to Mexico, I think 3 times now. I've been to France a lot. So that's been over a year of my life. So I definitely go back to the countries. And that's the great thing is I'm not trying to just dip into one country and then leave it. I'm truly trying to travel deep. And that's going to mean that I have to, by definition, return to the country if I want to explore and see other provinces and so on. So yeah, very good question there. Let me put this back up. So yeah, I revisit the countries all the time. I'm going to keep going back to those countries that I've been to before. So yeah, I'll be continuing my travels to go as deep as I can, to visit as many countries as I can, but also to revisit the countries I've already been to. And the great thing is, because I've already reached the B2 level, if I did reach it in that intensity, it means I can continue my studies and continue to improve the language and go beyond the B2 level. So I would definitely say my best languages are very safely in the C levels, like French and Spanish and Portuguese. And it's because I've returned to those countries and I've had deeper experiences that you can't really have in 3 months of intensive learning, that you can only have by spending time with natives, with people who can show you their country and their culture and who you can get to know in that way. Start wrapping up here. I really appreciate your questions, everybody. Again, go to fi3m.com/bootcamp if you want me to help you more directly, or go to my YouTube channel to see how I do with my Korean 3-month project. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope someone found it interesting for why intensive language learning projects could or might not be for you. So that being said, thanks so much. Until the next time, happy language learning, everybody.